Hi, my name is Emilia Huff, and my project on this final was the prison industrial complex, which, in simple words, is making money off of prisons, which logically doesn't make sense, because how would you make money? Well, they do it through jobs, and doing really crappy stuff to people, and really messing up some stuff. So, I will be doing my final project on the comparison of Holes, the movie, which I'm pretty sure a lot of people are common with, and the PIC, Prison Industrial Complex. So, the Prison Industrial Complex, a large part of it is the private prison. So, the private prison is a large component as it allows for the profitization of those who are incarcerated through outsourced labor. And we see this in Holes with our main character Stanley as he's taken to a private prison. So he was convicted in a federal court, but he was sent to a private outsourced position because he didn't need to actually go to prison. But we'll get to that later. And so as it is privately owned, it uses these inmates to outsource facilities from states as for their own benefit. And so mass incarcerations. That's another big part of it. So how do we get all these people and all this money that is made from the PIC? Where does it come from? It comes from mass incarcerations, which is pretty much, we have a 50% increase in the amount of people we imprison each year because we have mass incarceration. So the concept of it is people who have committed really non-violent crimes, such as drug-related crimes or tax evasion, those kinds of things that don't really warrant being sent to a maximum prison where you have to be under surveillance for violence, are being sent to prison because of minimum sentencing requirements that are laws that we have put into place that say if you're involved in marijuana trafficking, you have a certain amount of prison time that you have to spend because of this minimum sentencing. And so this allows the state governments to fill quotas that are given to them by private organizations that fund prison things like beds and medical and all those things. So they say, well, we keep giving you this things and we'll give you the beds, but you have to fill 90% of them all the time or else we're going to make you pay for them. And so, but it's a lot more expensive to pay for them on your own than just to have a private prison do them. And so in order to do this, they have tons of people who don't really need to go to prison and end up going to prison. So we have this case in Stanley as he's arrested on a silly conviction of stealing a famous baseball player's shoes because he didn't steal them, but because they thought he stole them and he didn't have good representation because he's of lower class and mandatory minimum sentencing, he was sent to a private prison, and he's being forced to work against his will. And given that he is white, and a first offense, and a small offense, logically he really shouldn't have been given time, based on what we hold value in. Not saying that whites are better, but typically in our prison system, white people tend to fare better, so it's kind of odd that he ended up going to prison. And then, but we see this because of minimum sentencing requirements. And so then this leads to who are these people that are being incarcerated, and those are our target groups based on race and class, which we've talked about in class of society and what value we put on certain things. And so the issue with the PIC is the disproportion between people who are majorly white and the people of middle class to upper class who are not going to prison for the same offenses of those as people of lower class and minorities. And this can be due to the systemic racism we have. They see them as large target groups because a lot of them come from lower classes and they can't provide proper representation and they can't really have a court case. So a lot of them plead guilty and end up having to go to prison because they can't afford a lawyer or anything like that. And so we see this in Holes as Stanley is a lower class white male, but the only thing really going for him is the lower class. But the majority of the other boys are of lower class minorities, the majority of them being black. And that is a big issue with what we have is 36% of the population in the United States are black, but 67% of the populations, if males in prison, are African American or black, and so that's a big disproportion we see as they're being targeted. And then how they make the money in the PIC is the name of the movie. We see that they're digging holes. And why are they digging holes? To get something for benefit of their owners, of the prison's owners. And this is how the PIC makes a large proportion of their money, as they outsource inmates for prison labor. So you hear the stereotypical prison inmates stamping license plates, and that's really happening. And the state government's benefiting and the private company's benefiting, but sometimes the inmate doesn't even benefit. They just are forced to work, as we see in Texas, where they're picking cotton in fields against their will, and people are standing around them with guns. Like, we see parallels between that and civil slavery. But sometimes inmates make a percentage of their money, which goes to, like, commissary, but sometimes that just doesn't happen, and they end up just working because they're forced to work and they have no choice. And the connection between state and private for-profit organizations is where the major connection between the prisons are, because not all prisons are private companies, and majority of them are state-run and government-run. But the issue with this is the fact that they outsource to the private companies, and we see this in holes, as Camp Green Lake, the name of the camp, is where the boys go, which is private. But we have characters coming in, like wardens, who are outsourced from the federal government and state governments, who run and check in and make sure that what's happening, needs to happen, is happening. But they benefit from having people in the prison, and the owners benefit from getting the prison labor. But in the end, it's just a whole big mess. And PIC just, it needs to be dismantled to the extent of, you shouldn't go to prison to be forced to work. You're being sent to prison because you committed a crime, you did something wrong. But prison should not be the only option, because we send a lot of people to prison that are mentally ill, homeless, just people who can't necessarily take care of themselves, and we end up punishing them. And we lose a lot, and it's a serious issue.